The following is a rebuttal by Andrew J. Schatkin to a New York Times article dated October 5, 2016, criticizing national referendums. The New York Times article states that a national referendum split Britain from the European Union and in Hungary backed the government's plan to restrict refugees. The New York Times says that these national referendums upended their government's plans and brought about crisis. There is a statement that national referendums subvert democracy, in which voters make their decisions with little information. I find this position extremely disturbing and false. There is an implicit rejection of the democratic process and the votes of the people. The article is quite lengthy, but I sense here a feeling and draw a conclusion that the writer of this opinion piece thinks that people's decisions are improper or wrong. I say to the writer that our entire system of voting is a referendum. Our system is based on political equality, and that the votes of the people determine the leaders in government. Perhaps the writer of this column rejects referendums because he thinks he knows better and objects to the people having a part in the political process. Perhaps one can conclude from this column that he thinks people are stupid, easily misled, and suggests they are subject to political winds. Moreover, as a Lutheran Christian, I find this conclusion particularly awful. The writer of this column does not know that Jesus was criticized for associating with publicans and sinners, and it was said of him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Meaning, can anything good come from what was regarded as this social and intellectual backwater? I also point out to this writer that Jesus pronounced the poor blessed and was executed beside two criminals, and that some of his disciples were fishermen and manual laborers. This opinion piece objecting to national referendums is solely at odds with my thinking, as I have said here. I suggest these writers named Amanda Tabb and Max Fisher revise their thinking radically. I would next like to talk about an October 7, 2016 article in the New York Times on page 16. In this article, Mr. Trump is criticized as prejudiced and discriminating when he suggests there be a limit on Muslim immigration to the United States. In fact, Mr. Awad, the executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, says that Mr. Trump is a bigot and reflects Islamophobia. I have this to say as a Lutheran Christian. I abhor any form of prejudice, discrimination, or race or religious hatred. I have every goodwill toward Muslims, knowing the profound love that God has for all men and women that have ever lived or will live. However, I think it is unfair to state that when Mr. Trump suggests limitations on Muslim immigration, that it is an act of prejudice or hate. It is an unfortunate fact that there have been a number of internal attacks by radical Muslims. I certainly know and do not indict the majority of peaceful Muslims, but it is grossly unfair to Mr. Trump, who is addressing what is nothing more than a national security issue. Prejudice is irrational and emotional. The internal attacks within the United States on 9/11, Boston, South Carolina, Texas, Minnesota, California, New York, and New Jersey are not an illusion. To seek to prevent these attacks is not hatred or prejudice, but reality and what has been a continued series of events. I would also like to comment on the column of Mr. Duthat on October 9, 2016, in the New York Times Sunday Review. Mr. Duthat uses the term elite. As I have said before, elite as connected with wealth and power is a misnomer. The elite are St. Francis, Dante, Milton, and Bach. Their wealthy patrons are long forgotten and deceased. Mr. Duthat refers to an angry nationalism and a revolt of the masses in the United States and Europe. It is quite apparent that he means by this that the people of a democratic society are raising legitimate issues. Mr. Duthat has a problem with the democratic process. Mr. Duthat refers to white nationalists, and by nationalism he clearly means the people of this country. He also refers to the populism of the West. Once again, Mr. Duthat purports to be a Catholic Christian, and he objects to the people being heard and thinks he knows all the answers. Use of the terms nationalism and populism are words to cover his distaste for the democratic process and for points of view other than his own. Again, in a column in the New York Times dated October 8, 2016, Mr. Brooks speaks of populists. Again, this is a code word for someone who objects to the democratic process, since the word populist clearly refers to the people and their thoughts, concerns, and issues. Mr. Brooks has a right to disagree with the people, but he cannot conclude that their concerns lack truth and label it populism. I would like to discuss the New York Times book review of May 1, 2016. In a column, Mr. Kirsch refers to Dante's Inferno, with its vision of divine justice, as sadistic. Mr. Kirsch, I think, is mistaken and erroneous in this thinking. The entire society and our world is based on justice. Someone who breaks the law is brought to justice. Children may be expelled or suffer a lesser penalty when they cheat. Authors who plagiarize are discredited. People who lie are found out. Our entire world is based on a moral version of justice. Dante's Inferno is not cruel, but is profound in giving us a grasp and understanding at how ultimately the world works. There is nothing sadistic about a trial for murder, and for someone being found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment or death. There is nothing sadistic about corruption being revealed and punished. Justice is not sadistic, but is the linchpin of our entire world and society. I suggest that Mr. Kirsch rethink his analysis of Dante. The working of justice and punishment is not sadism, but is how things in this cosmos have been set up. We do not know who set up this cosmic system, if anyone, but I surely know that there is one based on justice, and unfortunately the results of wrongdoing, which can be and are punished. Finally, I would like to comment on the column by Zoe Heller in the New York Times Book Review on May 1, 2016. Ms. Heller refers to the Kreutzer Sonata by Tolstoy as a bad book, which is the result of Christian asceticism. In this book, Ms. Heller says that Tolstoy had an idea of sexual abstinence. Ms. Heller, in my view, is limited in her intellectual vision. She thinks that Tolstoy's ideas are backward, if not crazy. I must remind her that St. Augustine, one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the world, was a monk. In fact, monasticism, both East and West, has included many great minds, including St. Thomas Aquinas and countless others. Monasticism has its genesis in following Christ, which includes for this movement having no property and not marrying. St. Paul, another great thinker, was unmarried and urged the same for others if they could do it. Ms. Heller's thinking is ahistorical and based on a conclusion that does not take into account the facts of history and the people of history. If Ms. Heller thinks monasticism or asceticism crazy, then I ask her, does she think the current sexual promiscuity desirable? If Ms. Heller thinks Tolstoy crazy, then those persons who embrace what I have just mentioned do not offer me a solution.